I think there's all of these things that Ashish talked about are very relevant. The ecosystem, the access to capital, the infrastructure. But I think there's the one big factor that I see there, which I think India still needs, is the whole cultural shift. Silicon Valley is not Silicon Valley because you have 100 VCs and you have 1,000 attorneys and great bankruptcy laws. All of that is available or will be available, as we heard from the panelists today, very, very soon in India. Vikram was just talking to me, and I know that he's investing, and there are several people. Ashok is now starting to invest in the Indian environment. I think the one big thing that differentiates the Valley from anywhere else in the world is the cultural aspect. And anecdotally, I was just talking to you about this example. About 15 days ago, I was in a Starbucks in the heart of the Valley in Los Gatos. And I started talking to the barista there, and he talked to me about, what do I do? I said, I run a company, an IT services firm. He said, what kind of verticals do you focus on? So now this is an interesting conversation developing with somebody who's making my coffee. And then I told him that we focus, among other things, on healthcare vertical, and he wanted to talk about patient management, and he wanted to pitch to me an idea. He actually took my card and said, if you'd like, I would come and meet you and talk to you about how I want to focus on critical care management. And this is a guy who's biding his time, looking at the market and trying to identify opportunities. The other aspect of the Valley is it's a very egalitarian concept. It's very engineering oriented. Everywhere else in the world, even in the US, if you look at New York City, if you look at other big centers of commerce there, you will see that power is really held by a select few. Here, they've really, really distributed it. If you are joining as a secretary in the company, you know how many options are you going to get. So I think that just gives a completely different cultural vibe, which if we can adopt some of that, I think that's far more critical in creating the next big disruptors, because what we've been doing, including myself for the last 20 years, is we've been trying to solve everybody else's mess. IT services firms were created to say, you have a problem, I will solve it. I'll solve it cheap because I can move labor offshore. But what we have really not started thinking of is in terms of what can I do to eliminate the problem completely, not just solve it. Sometimes we are scared to solve the problem and eliminate it completely because it impacts our revenue streams. So I think those are aspects that I would think matter in creating the next disruptor. Disruption can happen on a very, very big scale internally. A global disruption can happen on a very big scale internally in India itself. If you just look at some of the statistics that I was going through, just this whole Startup India campaign is supposed to throw up as many as 100 million jobs in the next 10 years. If you look at that and just say those are slightly higher level jobs, but to support those 100 million jobs, you will probably need a lot more infrastructure and a lot more food and grocery outlets and those kind of things. That's probably another 50 million jobs. 150 million jobs, no other place in the world is creating that. I mean, just to give an example, the US creates about 3 million new jobs a year. 70% of them come from the startup market. Here you're talking of 100, 150 million jobs. That this could be the biggest attraction. This could be the disruption of a lifetime for the entire world, because where do I find jobs? The only jobs available are in India. So that's what is going to happen. My son is going to come after his graduate degrees from the US and say, the only place I can really put this to work is in Bangalore or in Delhi. And that's what I see as a huge disruption in itself. Making everything aligned to what's happening in the United States or what's happening in the developed countries in Europe is, I think, a fallacy. You have to look at what models from India can emerge which can support countries which are in the same state or even a little bit lower in terms of their growth cycles or development cycles. And I think that's where the big disruption could come. Just trying to, I think the definition has to be expanded to not just saying, can an Indian company go and conquer a US market or a US segment or a European segment, but to actually say, what could we do in Africa and what could we do in Latin America, like you're saying? Because I think those are markets which probably understand this very well. At Infinite, what we do is we're catching people or kids or human beings at an even earlier stage. We sponsor a very big program under the Indus entrepreneurs, Thai chapters, called the Indus Young Entrepreneurs Program, where we are actually grabbing a lot of school-going and college-going kids who come up to us with some really, really cool business ideas, and we are funding them. So I think, I don't know where the market starts here and who's, have you ever taken a pitch from somebody who's in 12th grade and said, hey, I have this brilliant idea? Because that's exactly what Zuckerberg did in his second year of Harvard. I think missing out on that is an opportunity lost. Those are the people who are really in touch with what's happening in that generation. I mean, Facebook is already done and dusted in the 16 to 20 year or 12 to 20-year-old crowd. They are onto Snapchat and even...
I made that mistake.
You did?
So there was a founder who wrote to me on Twitter saying that he wants to do an adjusted Airbnb. So I looked at his background. He said, I'm an IIT dropout. So this is like 4 years ago. I was like, okay, whatever. And Airbnb just entered India. That's Oyo Rooms.
Oh, your anti-portfolio is equally interesting then.
So I think, so at Infinite, we recognize that we sponsor a lot of these. We've done more than 15 or 20 of those ideas, which really came from young entrepreneurs who are less than 18 years of age. And that's a very successful program. So I think, you have to look at the entire spectrum. And I don't see any reason why that should not apply here also to find, because, to really create disruption, you have to capture that age bracket. And those are the guys who are going to be the next after the Y generation or whatever the next generation is going to be called, the Z generation. So to me, I think, the earliest disruption in the entire industry came from India in the 5th century. If there was no zero assigned to a null value by Aryabhat, none of this would have been possible. So I think, are Indians capable of creating global disruption? They are. They've always done that. I agree with a lot of what Vikram said. I think if the government gets out of the way, the IT industry in India thrived in an environment where the government was very much in the way. So with all of these new initiatives that we see or hear about, Make in India and Startup India and all of the great stuff that's happening, by all means, I think there will be not just one, but several global disruptors coming out of India.